Hello, I am Recky, and welcome back for another severe weather reaction. We're going to go back to Swegle Studios. About 15 hours ago, he uploaded a video that caught my eye severely. I mean, that in a good way, of course. Top 10 worst U.S. hurricanes. And to be honest, I have little to no knowledge about hurricanes. And most of the reactions I've done is, of course, for the tornadoes. A couple of hurricanes, of course. I know very little about the top 10 worst U.S. hurricanes. If I'm not completely mistaken, Katrina was a hurricane, and the devastation that one did is beyond anything you can actually measure with. I'm pretty sure that's definitely on top of this. If I'm not completely mistaken, of course, you guys gonna probably chop my head off in the comment section. But either way, if you haven't checked out Swegle Studios before, I strongly suggest that you do. There's a bunch of videos, and if you do enjoy watching me, I'm pretty sure you will enjoy watching him. So go there and give them the support that they so much deserve. You find the link for the video and, of course, for the channel located right down there in my description. If you do enjoy this one, like and subscribe. I appreciate that. Before we watch, we say thank you so much to the channel members and the patrons for the excellent support. Thank you. A big shout out to the Supreme Tier donators over by Patreon, and of course, channel membership. Personal shout outs goes to the ultimate supporters, and that's Deja, Walt, Dwayne, Dana, Troy, Robert, Matt, Barbara, and Kathy. That's an amazing list right there. Let's do this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to swoop this in.
The United States is just a natural.
Oh, crap. I accidentally clicked stuff. I'm going to crank it up real good. Now, let's do this.
The United States is just a natural disaster prone country.
National disaster prone country. And that means that they're prone to get the shittiest weather ever.
The United States is just a natural disaster prone country. You got tornadoes, wildfires, even freaking volcanoes on rare occasions. Can't forget about Mount St. Helens. But out of all the natural disasters, one in particular rises above the rest. Hurricanes are by far the costliest, most destructive, and deadliest natural disasters on record here in the U.S.
And this was something that when I started doing reactions to American severe weather situations, there was me thinking that the worst thing that can happen is a tornado. And because I didn't understand the magnitude of a severe hurricane. For instance, if a tornado is coming, you are most certainly lucky enough that it won't hit you. But if you're super unlucky, it can hit you, and depending on the size of the tornado, you can be effed, basically. But if a severe hurricane goes in, everyone in that particular location will be affected by a hurricane. Let me know what you think. I mean, I'm trying to. I know you can't compare a tornado versus a hurricane. So I'm going to start with that. And I'm going to end with that.
Well, at least until the next asteroid impact. And today we're going over the top 10 worst historic hurricanes. We'll be looking at 3 factors to determine these ratings: cost, death toll, and power. And we're starting the list with number 10, the very recent Hurricane Ian that spanned from September 23rd to October 1st in 2022. Hurricane Ian was, at its peak, a Category 5 major hurricane with a minimum barometric pressure of 937 millibars. Peak wind speeds from Ian measured in the 160 mile per hour range. Initially forming over the Caribbean Sea, Hurricane Ian would make landfall as a Category 3 hurricane over western Cuba on September.
Wait a minute. Did he say 160 miles per hour?
Wind speeds from Ian measured in the 160 mile per hour range.
Oh my, that's 257 kilometers, bro. Did he? That's incredible.
Category 5 major hurricane with a minimum barometric pressure of 937 millibars. Peak wind speeds from Ian measured in the 160 mile per hour range. Initially forming over the Caribbean Sea, Hurricane Ian would make landfall as a Category 3 hurricane over western Cuba on September 27th, where 5 fatalities would occur. After passing over Cuba, Ian would strengthen to a Category 5 hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico. As it slowly approached the U.S. mainland, the hurricane weakened to a Category 4, right before striking southwest Florida on September 28th, and then tore its way all the way across the Florida Peninsula to the Atlantic, where it would then swing back around, striking the coast of South Carolina near the city of Georgetown on September 30th as a much weaker Category 1 hurricane. Overall, Hurricane Ian caused a total of $117 million worth of damage, making it the third costliest hurricane of all time. And while Ian did cause some damage in the Carolinas and in Cuba, we really need to focus on one state in particular, and that is Florida, because it was here that by far the worst damage occurred. The hurricane claimed 161 lives, but 150 of these deaths occurred in Florida alone. The city of Fort Myers and its surrounding suburbs in Lee County saw 72 deaths. This high death toll was caused by a variety of factors, one being the 15-foot storm surge that flowed onto Fort Myers Beach, Sanibel Island, and Bonita Springs. The flooding destroyed 52,000 buildings, and it even caused the Sanibel Causeway to collapse, cutting off road access to the island. And it wasn't just the coast of Florida that was heavily affected. Large amounts of rainfall caused major inland flooding, and there were even several tornadoes
Wow.
affected.
Hold on.
Large amounts of rainfall caused major
Look at that. This is something that we got flooding in Sweden, of course, but this is not even close to it. This is incredible to watch. Bound to be gators around here too, right?
major inland flooding, and there were even several tornadoes spawned, particularly in southern Florida near Miami. Due to the significance of the storm, the name Ian has been retired by the World Meteorological Organization. Moving on to number 9, Hurricane Camille. Forming on August 14th, 1969 and lasting until the 22nd, Camille would peak as a Category 5 major hurricane with a minimum barometric low pressure reading of 900 millibars, making it one of the strongest hurricanes on today's list. This hurricane featured wind speeds near 175 miles per hour. It also featured a very similar path to so many infamous Atlantic hurricanes.
170 miles. It's about 280 kilometers. And I cannot grasp that speed for a wind. I
Forming in the Caribbean Sea and then moving up towards the Gulf of Mexico into the Gulf Coast of Louisiana, Mississippi, and Florida. While hurricane formation was slow at first, environmental factors such as a warm environment and moisture over the Gulf of Mexico allowed Camille to quickly strengthen to a strong Category 5 hurricane with wind speeds near 170 miles per hour. Forecasters initially thought that Camille would head towards the east, towards Florida, similar to Ian in the last entry. However, they would be a bit off with their forecast. Here's a chart of the forecasted path. See these lines over here? Those are the forecasted paths of Hurricane Camille.
So this is within 24 hours, 48 and 72. It's going to turn a bit right up here through for Florida.
And this line on the far left, that's the path that Hurricane Camille actually took.
Oh, hold on. So everyone thought this. Is it right?
Camille. And this line on the far left,
No, the far left here is the way it went. That it predicted it to go slightly right on the East Coast. I'm sorry, but it didn't.
that's the path that Hurricane Camille actually took. This meant that a lot of people in Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana were not properly prepared and were caught off guard when on August 18th, Camille made landfall in Bay St. Louis, Mississippi at its full strength, with the wind speeds around 175 miles per hour. These high winds wrecked the coast of Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana, destroying thousands of buildings, resulting in the loss of 143 lives in these 3 states. One urban legend tells about a supposed hurricane party at an apartment in Pass Christian, Mississippi, where 23 attendees died and only 1 made it out alive. However, this urban legend has mostly been debunked. There was some good news. Since Camille was traveling at such a fast rate, there was little rainfall on the coast. However, the same could not be said for Virginia. By the time the storm reached Virginia on August 20th, its pace had slowed significantly, leading to huge amounts of rainfall resulting in massive flooding and landslides in Virginia. In fact, more people died from blunt force trauma caused by the landslides in Virginia than those who were on the coast. Overall, 153 people would perish in Virginia, 123 people in Nelson County alone. 21 of these victims were all from the same family, the Huffmans.
No.
Hurricane Camille remains the deadliest natural disaster to
Holy crap. Basically, an entire family just perished in one hurricane.
Ever hit the state of Virginia. Overall, Hurricane Camille claimed 259 lives, and due to this high death toll, the name Camille has been retired by the WMO. Number 8 is one that I'm sure many of us remember quite well, and that is Hurricane Harvey in 2017. Now, while Hurricane Harvey only peaked as a Category 4 hurricane, which is still very strong, the hurricane is tied as the costliest hurricane on record, causing $125 billion worth of damage. The storm that would become Harvey first began as a tropical storm near the Lesser Antilles Islands, but would eventually weaken back into a tropical depression as it crossed the Caribbean Sea. It would eventually make landfall over the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, but then suddenly pivot north into the warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico. These warm waters helped the hurricane to quickly strengthen to a Category 4 strength, with a minimum low pressure reading of 937 millibars. Harvey continued north until it struck the coast of southeast Texas. There's one factor that makes Harvey stick out from the other hurricanes on this list, and that is the insane amount of rain that was dropped on Texas. I mean, holy goodness, the amount of rainfall is ridiculous. Look at this radar imagery. Watch this radar loop of Hurricane Harvey. The hurricane makes landfall over Corpus Christi, and then it just stops. Like, it literally just pauses over Corpus Christi. It's crazy. And then it slowly picks up the pace and slowly moves to the north. Now specifically look at the precipitation over Houston. Oh,
look at this. Why did it just linger down in Corpus Christi?
Oh my word. It's insane. 60 inches of rain were recorded in Nederland, Texas. All of this rainfall obviously led to a lot of flooding and hundreds of thousands of homes being destroyed. Hurricane Harvey remains
60 inches about. Oh, wow.
This rainfall obviously led to a lot of flooding and hundreds of thousands of homes being destroyed. Hurricane Harvey remains the wettest hurricane on record.
I'm sorry, I got my other monitor, so I take the converter directly, just to get kind of a grasp, because I don't know. So 60 inches is about 152 centimeters. That's 1.5 meter. Holy crap.
In the U.S. Rain wasn't the only damaging factor of Hurricane Harvey. There were also 22 weak tornadoes throughout the state. Overall, 107 people would tragically lose their lives in the U.S. 103 of these people were in Texas. Hurricane 7 is actually a weak hurricane, only a Category 1, but before we get to number 7, a quick word from today's sponsor, PDS Debt. Sometimes in life, you need money. Perhaps it's school or a home, so you take out a loan. Oh, but then all of a sudden you have twin babies like me, so now you need a larger car, so you take out another loan. And then you decide to take the twins on a vacation and you start swiping that credit card over and over again because vacation can be quite expensive. So your debt continues to grow. Look, getting into debt, it's easy. Getting out, not so much. And that's for a reason. The system is set up to make it difficult. But thankfully, there's PDS Debt. If you're struggling with credit cards, personal loans, collections, or medical bills, you need to check out PDS Debt. PDS Debt provides services to match you with debt solutions tailored to your particular financial situation. They offer many customizable options to help guide you out of debt. Anyone with $10,000 or more in eligible debt qualifies. Perhaps you have a bad credit score. No problem, PDS Debt will still provide the help you need. PDS Debt is also very understanding. They will listen to your specific debt scenario to then help provide you the best option for paying it off in a fraction of the time. Highly recommend checking out PDS Debt. Getting on top of your financial situation is very important. Stop waiting and start saving. Get a free debt analysis right now at pdsdebt.com/swaggle. It only takes 30 seconds. That's pdsdebt.com/swaggle.
You said Swegle?
Swegle, S-W-E-G-L-E.
I said Swegle. That's kind of wrong.
Back to number 7, the weak but significant Category 1 hurricane Agnes. The storm that would become Agnes formed on June 14, 1972, and dissipated almost 1 month later on July 6. The path of Agnes is an interesting one. First forming down by the Yucatan Peninsula, Agnes struck western Cuba and Florida as a Category 1 hurricane with wind speeds near.
One thing that I'm definitely noticing, and you don't have to be a professor in science or in weather to understand, it's basically the same spot. Either it goes up here to Florida, or it goes up here towards Texas. Got Corpus Christi over here. So this is basically the only path that they take. That's incredible.
Near 80 miles per hour. While weak, the storm did claim lives in both Cuba and Florida, but the story of Agnes was just beginning. Hurricane Agnes is interesting as while it was a weak hurricane, it was able to maintain its strength as a tropical storm as it traveled over the United States through Georgia, the Carolinas, and up to New England. In fact, most of the destruction from this hurricane occurred way up in the northeast in Pennsylvania and New York.
Oh,
The
wow.
destruction was very similar to Hurricane Harvey, as most of it was the result of loads of rainfall and the resulting flooding. Take a look at this rainfall map, and you can easily see which areas were impacted the most. Virginia saw 13 deaths, New York saw 24 deaths, and Pennsylvania saw 50 deaths. Much of the flooding crest records in these regions are still in place today. Some were over 30 feet, which is crazy. That's like entire buildings swallowed up by water, like under the water and like no roofs peeking out. The flooding was so bad in Maryland that it caused the Gwen Oak amusement park to close its doors forever. Pennsylvania was the most impacted, where 70,000 homes were completely destroyed. Within Pennsylvania, Harrisburg on the Saskatchewan River may have seen the worst damage from the flooding. Some buildings were under 17 feet of water. In fact, one cemetery
What did he say?
the worst damage from the flooding. Some buildings were under 17 feet of water. In fact, one cemetery located at a pretty high elevation flooded, leading to 2,000 caskets floating amongst the waters. Unfortunately, there were also 3 tragic
That's nasty, though. That's nasty.
feet of water. In fact, one cemetery located at a pretty high elevation flooded, leading to 2,000 caskets floating amongst the waters. Unfortunately, there were also 3 tragic indirect deaths when a helicopter filming the flooding in Harrisburg crashed on June 26. Overall, Hurricane Agnes shows that while you may be far away from the tropics, you can still be at risk for tropical storms under certain conditions. Moving on to number 6, which is
And that's what I'm talking about. Just before, we got the south part of the United States getting most of the tropical hurricanes, but this one, Agnes, actually moved northeast. And it needs to be, what I understand, very special circumstances.
another recent hurricane. This spot goes to Hurricane Maria in 2017, a Category 5 major hurricane with a minimum barometric pressure reading of 907 millibars. This hurricane featured peak wind speeds of 175 miles per hour.
Yeah.
The hurricane originated in the Atlantic, northeast of South America. When it made landfall over the island of Dominica, it was already at its peak strength with wind speeds in the 165 mile per hour range. These are the highest wind speeds ever recorded on the island. 98% of the buildings on the island saw significant damage. Maria dropped large amounts of rainfall, which in turn led to deadly landslides. Overall, 65 would lose their lives in Dominica. Now, Hurricane Maria is a bit different from the rest of the entries on today's list. Technically, this list is about the worst hurricanes to impact the United States. Hurricane Maria wasn't much of a problem for the US mainland, but it had a huge impact on Puerto Rico, which technically is a US territory, even though technically they have their own Olympic team. I found that out like literally yesterday. Anyway, I wasn't originally going to include them on this list, but it was just such a tragic and horrific event that I just had to. Maria claimed 3,059 lives. 2,975 of these deaths occurred in Puerto Rico. 2,975. Maria made landfall in Puerto Rico on September 20th as a Category 4 hurricane with wind speeds in the 155 mile per hour range. These high winds, along with storm surge, destroyed hundreds of thousands of buildings. The power grid went completely offline, leaving 3.5 million people without electricity. The Doppler radar was even destroyed, and these are built to withstand some pretty strong winds, like 135 mile per hour winds. Hurricane Maria is by far the deadliest hurricane on American soil in recent memory. Number 5, Hurricane Audrey.
Holy crap. So Hurricane Maria. Wonder if there's a documentary of that particular hurricane. I'm going to check that out.
Audrey. Hurricane Audrey formed on June 25th and dissipated quickly on June 29th, 1957. While Audrey only peaked as a Category 3 hurricane with max wind speeds in the 125 mile per hour range, she still managed to claim 416 lives over the US mainland. Initially forming over the Bay of Campeche, Audrey slowly
Look at that. Same spot. Wow. This is, I think if I do like this, is basically where 99.9 of all the hurricanes spawn, a bit more south, of course. But is this the Gulf of Mexico, if I'm not completely mistaken? Is it? Yeah, I'm sorry. I think it is, though.
Slowly crept north and struck one of the U.S.'s most vulnerable hurricane spots, the Gulf of Mexico coast of Texas, Louisiana, and Alabama. One thing you may notice from this list is that when hurricanes hit this area, it's almost always catastrophic. Audrey made landfall at the Texas-Louisiana border on June 27th. In Texas, Galviston saw a large amount of the destruction as the storm surge broke through the Galveston seawall, flooding large amounts of the city. One fishing ship off the coast, with 9 crew members near Galveston, capsized, killing all occupants on board. As bad as it was in Texas, the damage was even worse on the Louisiana side of Audrey. Millions of acres were completely flooded, and the town of Cameron was almost completely destroyed by a 15-foot storm surge. In fact, the only building left in Cameron was the courthouse. It was in Cameron where the majority of the fatalities occurred. 371 out of the 416 deaths occurred in the city. The parish of Cameron, Louisiana is a hurricane magnet. In 2005, Hurricane Rita slammed into Cameron, destroying most of the town again. Thankfully, in 2005, pretty much everyone had evacuated. But again, in 2008, Hurricane Ike destroyed 80% of the town. Due to all the hurricanes, Cameron, Louisiana's population dropped 80% between 2000 and 2010. One of the biggest reasons Audrey was so deadly was due to the lack of evacuations. Much blame was put on the Weather Bureau for not properly communicating with the residents on the Gulf Coast. They did warn of the hurricane, but they were just pretty lax about it. This actually all led to the Weather Bureau
Pictured the same spot getting hit over and over and over and over. Some people stayed, some people just get out of Dodge because living there is a freaking lottery.
Bureau/United States being sued by residents in these areas. In the 1963 case, Barty v. United States, the case was unfortunately dismissed. Number 4 goes to the 1935 Labor Day Category 5 hurricane that formed on August 29th and dissipated on September 10th.
35.
At its peak strength, the Labor Day hurricane featured 185 mile-per-hour wind gusts with a minimum low pressure reading of 892 millibars, making this hurricane the strongest, most powerful hurricane on record.
297, was it 97?
The Labor Day hurricane featured 185 mile-per-hour wind.
Holy shit. How can it?
Gusts with a minimum low pressure reading of 892 millibars, making this hurricane the strongest, most powerful hurricane on record in the U.S. The storm initially formed to the east of the Bahamas. As it headed west towards the Florida Keys, the hurricane quickly intensified to a very powerful Category 5. At this point, it traveled off the Gulf Coast of Florida, up through the Panhandle and over Georgia, the Carolinas, and Virginia, and then finally back out into the Atlantic Ocean, where it would eventually dissipate. The 1935 Labor Day hurricane was not only extremely powerful, but it was also very deadly, claiming 423 lives. The most impacted were the Florida Keys, specifically the upper keys of Long Key and Craig Key, where an 18-foot storm surge swept over the islands and the very southern tip of the Florida Peninsula. The town of Isla Mirada took a direct hit and was completely destroyed. The railroad line connecting the islands to the Florida mainland was also destroyed, preventing aid from responding quickly. Today, situated in Isla Mirada, close to the location of the town's post office at mile marker 82 East on US Highway 1, stands a monument that was created by the Florida Division of the Federal Art Project.
Wow, that's amazing. Look at that. That's some high quality. The trees, the water.
This memorial marks the location and burial of the ashes of over 300 victims. Going into the top 3, these storms get much more serious and much more deadly. Starting off with number 3, a hurricane that we are all very familiar with. I'm of course talking about Hurricane Katrina in 2005.
And that's number 3?
It's probably the most well-known hurricane event, and for a good reason. It is tied as the costliest hurricane on record, causing $125 billion worth of damage. At its peak, Katrina was a Category 5 major hurricane with wind speeds around 175 miles per hour and a very low minimum pressure of 902 millibars. Hurricane Katrina originally formed near the Bahamas on August 23rd. 2 days later, on August 25th, it was strengthened to a Category 1 hurricane just before striking the east coast of Florida. Katrina weakened as it crossed the Florida Peninsula, but once the storm was over the warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico, it rapidly strengthened from a Category 3 to a Category 5 hurricane in less than 9 hours. The hurricane then headed towards that really dangerous low-altitude coast of Mississippi and Louisiana. On August 29th, Katrina, now a Category 3 hurricane, slammed into New Orleans and the surrounding Gulf Coast. The high storm surge penetrated the various flood protection barriers, flooding 80% of the city. The devastation can clearly be seen on Google Earth. The story of Katrina is really about the failures of the New Orleans flood walls. Like, look at these levee breaches on Google Earth. This barge right here smashed into this levee, destroying it, flooding the entire neighborhood. There were flooded interstates, Walmarts had been flooded, the Superdome was heavily damaged, and there's a lot of drama around the Superdome. I want to eventually do like a Google Earth video on Hurricane Katrina, kind of like my old school video, just going over the damage and the recovery. So stay tuned for that. Overall, 1,800 plus lost their lives from Katrina, and 1,577 people lost their lives in Louisiana alone. That's a huge amount. A death toll on the US mainland like this has not been seen since the 1928 Oki Chobe hurricane. Speaking of the 1928 Oki Chobe hurricane, that is number 2.
Oki Chobe. Never heard of this one.
2 on today's list. Very powerful, Category 5 major hurricane with estimated wind speeds between 160 and 170 miles per hour. This hurricane had a minimum low pressure reading.
Again, I cannot grasp. It's almost 300 kilometers per hour. I cannot grasp that. I cannot understand how dangerous and insane wind speeds that is.
Of 928 millibars. This monster hurricane formed on September 6 off the coast of West Africa, way further away than any of the other previous entries. You might be wondering, how on earth were we able to track a hurricane in 1928? Well, it's because there were ships throughout the Atlantic that tracked the storm's progress. As the storm crossed the Atlantic and approached the Lesser Antilles Islands, it rapidly strengthened to what would be a modern-day Category 4 hurricane. The hurricane swung north and struck Puerto Rico, where a wind station measured 200 mile per hour winds. However, this rating is disputed and it's believed to be inaccurate, but still, I mean, obviously there were high winds regardless. The hurricane continued north over the Bahamas, where it would eventually make landfall in southeast Florida near West Palm Beach as a Category 4. The hurricane would then travel inland and slowly weaken as it struck the communities around Lake Oki Chobe. Now, in the Caribbean and the Bahamas, the hurricane claimed 1,600 lives, but in Florida, in the US, the hurricane claimed 2,511 lives, making it one of the deadliest natural disasters on record for the United States. 2,500 of these deaths all occurred in Florida. Storm surge mixed with high winds destroyed thousands of buildings near the coast, specifically near Miami, but the majority of the fatalities came from the heavily populated southern portion of Lake Oki Chobe, where the lake's dike collapsed. It's estimated that at least 1,800 lives were lost from the resulting flooding. Unfortunately, there are also major racial issues in connection to the 1928 Oki Chobe hurricane. Many of the victims were black migrant farm workers and did not receive proper burials or even recognition. However, thankfully, they would eventually be recognized thanks to people like Robert Hazard, who helped establish proper memorials, as well as African-American writer Zora Neale Hurston, who wrote Their Eyes Were Watching God, a novel exploring the hurricane's impact on black migrant workers. Before we get to number 1, a couple of honorable mentions. There's the 1899 Puerto Rico hurricane that resulted in 3,885 deaths. There's Hurricane Sandy in 2012 with 254 deaths, 150 of these being in the US. This was number 11 on my list, and it was actually number 10 for half of the time I was editing this video, but I kept going back and forth. It just barely missed the top 10. Other honorable mentions include Hurricane Andrew in 1993, Hurricane Irma in 2017, Hurricane Wilma in 2005, the Miami hurricane of 1926, and Hurricane Floyd in 1999. But now, on to number 1. Finally, we have made it to the number 1 worst U.S. hurricane on record, the infamous 1900 Galveston hurricane, a tragic storm that claimed somewhere between 6,000 and 12,000 lives. At its peak strength, the Galveston hurricane had a minimum barometric pressure of 936 millibars, with wind speeds in the 145 mile per hour range. Now, we've seen stronger hurricanes, but the damage caused by this hurricane is ridiculous. The storm remained relatively weak as it passed over the Lesser Antilles Islands and Cuba, but like so many other hurricanes, it rapidly strengthened over the warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico. From there, it was strengthened to what would be a modern-day Category 4 hurricane, and then smashed into the Gulf Coast of Texas and Louisiana. This same area that we've talked about so much in this video. This is not a good area. Do not live in this area of the US. The hurricane continued inland and even remained a tropical storm all the way up till Iowa on September 12th. As you could probably guess from the name, the island city of Galveston, Texas was the worst hit by the hurricane. A 12-foot storm surge swept over the city, flooding it completely, destroying 7,000 buildings. It's worth noting that the highest point in Galveston in 1900 was 9 feet above sea level. So yeah, the entire town was flooded. To make matters worse, the city and much of the Texas coast in general endured 120-mile-per-hour wind gusts. Galveston was supposed to be a huge hub for Texas, a large and very important city. However, after the hurricane, many investors decided to take their money to the nearby city of Houston instead. So Houston became the hub for that area of Texas. While the death toll varies, the most common number is around 8,000, making the Galveston hurricane the deadliest natural disaster in U.S. history. That concludes today's video. Let me know your thoughts. Do you agree with the entries on this list? What are some hurricanes that you would have added? I'd love to know. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.
I gotta tell you another banger video from Swegle Studios, and if you haven't checked out yet, strongly suggest that you do. You find the link for the channel, and of course for this video we watched, top 10 worst U.S. hurricanes, located right down in the description. And again, I cannot grasp. I have my second monitor, and every time he said something that wasn't Imperial, I had to go over there and get the conversion directly so I could understand. But I can't still understand how wind speed up to 280 kilometers per hour, around 175 miles per hour. I cannot understand that. That is completely mind blowing, and I can't grasp it. That's insane. Well, if you did enjoy this reaction to top 10 worst hurricanes in U.S. history, let me know by smacking the like and, of course, hitting that subscribe. Greatly appreciate that. So, until next time, I'm Recky. You stay safe.